Sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? But have you ever asked yourself, why do stupidity and power so often go hand in hand? Why is it that people who are clearly unqualified, sometimes even absurdly foolish, are the ones who end up at the top, making decisions, holding authority, and impacting millions of lives? Chances are, you've felt that frustration before. Watching a mediocre boss rise through the ranks, a politician speak like a fifth grader, or a clueless celebrity get worshipped by millions. And the smart, capable, thoughtful ones? They're often quiet, overlooked, or even pushed aside. Is this just a weird coincidence? Or is there a hidden mechanism in society that actually favors incompetence? Here's the twist. Machiavelli, the 16th century political thinker, saw this coming 500 years ago. And he didn't just explain why the foolish often rise to power. He argued that intelligence itself can be a major obstacle to gaining it. In today's video, we're diving into this strange paradox through the lens of Machiavelli, modern psychology, and real-world examples you'll definitely recognize. Because if you want to understand why the world works the way it does, or even figure out how to navigate it yourself, you'll need to understand how power really works. Let's begin. In the 16th century, amidst the turbulent political landscape of Florence, Niccolò Machiavelli, exiled from the political arena he cherished, crafted a masterpiece that would ignite centuries of debate: The Prince. Unlike the starry-eyed philosophers before him, who dreamed of utopian rulers, Machiavelli was a pragmatist. He didn't care about how leaders should behave in an ideal world. His focus was razor-sharp: how power actually works in the gritty, unforgiving reality of human nature. His chilling insight: everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are, cuts to the core of his philosophy. In the game of power, perception reigns supreme, often overshadowing reality. This is the first clue to a perplexing paradox. Appearing competent can matter far more than actually being competent. Machiavelli noticed something unsettling about intelligent leaders. Their brilliance could be their downfall. Why? Because intelligence often comes with traits that are liabilities in the ruthless arena of power: nuanced thinking, ethical dilemmas, and self-awareness. Picture a brilliant mind stepping into a cutthroat power structure. They see complexity where others demand simplicity. They admit limitations while rivals make bold, sweeping promises. They question themselves, while others radiate unshakable confidence. In environments where brash assertions trump careful deliberation, these intellectual strengths become shackles. The contrast is stark when you compare someone like Socrates, whose relentless questioning led to his death sentence in Athenian democracy, with populist leaders who've climbed to power by peddling simple, absolute certainties. Socrates' famous declaration, "I know that I know nothing," cemented his philosophical legacy but marked him as a political failure. Meanwhile, history is littered with leaders who've soared by proclaiming they alone hold all the answers. A provocative 2017 study from the Journal of Management adds a modern twist to this paradox, and it might make you squirm. It found that intelligence boosts leadership effectiveness, but only up to an IQ of about 120. Beyond that, extra smarts can actually hinder a leader's rise. The reason? Exceptionally intelligent people often struggle to connect with others who can't follow their complex thought patterns. Imagine that. Being too smart might block your path to leadership. Whether you buy the study or not, it forces us to rethink what kind of intelligence fuels power. Raw intellect alone isn't enough. It can even be a liability. So, if brilliance can backfire, what propels people to the top? This brings us to a psychological principle that explains why we so often follow the wrong people. Dunning-Kruger effect. Have you ever noticed how the loudest voice in the room often becomes the most influential, regardless of what that voice is actually saying? This phenomenon has deep roots in our psychological makeup. In the 1990s, psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger identified what we now know as the Dunning-Kruger effect. The cognitive bias where people with limited knowledge dramatically overestimate their competence, while genuine experts tend to underestimate theirs, aware of how much they don't know. The fool does think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool. Shakespeare captured this principle centuries before psychology gave it a name. But Machiavelli would have recognized it immediately as a fundamental truth about power: dynamics. Modern research confirms this bias operates in leadership contexts. A 2020 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that individuals who displayed overconfidence were more likely to be perceived as leaders by their peers, regardless of their actual competence. The appearance of certainty was more persuasive than demonstrated expertise. Consider figures like George Armstrong Custer, whose supreme confidence led to catastrophic military decisions, yet earned him rapid promotions and devoted followers. Or look at the tech industry, where founders who speak in absolute visionary terms often secure massive funding over more measured, experienced entrepreneurs. WeWork's Adam Neumann exemplified this. Despite a shaky business model, his unshakable confidence helped him attract billions in investment and a cult-like following. This pattern repeats globally. Japan's Masayoshi Son of SoftBank lost $70 billion on failed investments while maintaining investor confidence through sheer force of personality. Russia's oligarchs rose not through competence, but through connections and confidence during the post-Soviet privatization. Singapore, by contrast, built safeguards specifically designed to prevent confidence from trumping competence in leadership selection. In 2012, researchers from Stanford and the University of Houston found that narcissism, not competence, may be the strongest predictor of who emerges as a leader in unstructured groups. The groups led by narcissists didn't perform better. They just thought they did. Why does this happen? Our brains use mental shortcuts when evaluating others. Confidence signals competence. Decisiveness suggests clarity of thought. These shortcuts served our ancestors well in straightforward environments, but become problematic in our complex modern world, where genuine expertise often involves acknowledging uncertainty. This confidence illusion explains how incompetent individuals might initially rise to power. But there's something even more insidious at play, a mechanism that helps them entrench their position throughout entire organizations. The network effect. Niccolo Machiavelli, the sharp-eyed observer of power's underbelly, uncovered a chilling truth about leadership. Incompetent rulers deliberately surround themselves with even less capable subordinates. In The Prince, he wrote, "The first method for estimating the intelligence of a ruler is to look at the men he has around him." This isn't accidental. Weak leaders choose weaker followers to shield their authority from any hint of challenge, creating a ripple effect that embeds incompetence deep within the system. Organizational psychologist Dr. Tomasz Chamorro-Premuzic calls this competence threatening. Insecure leaders aren't just wary of talent, they're terrified of it. A competent subordinate might expose their flaws or, worse, outshine them. So, instead of recruiting brilliance, they prioritize loyalty and docile personalities, fostering a competence drought that spreads from the top down. This dynamic isn't just a quirk, it's a deliberate strategy to preserve power at the expense of progress. History bears this out. In Emperor Commodus's Rome, skilled administrators were sidelined for sycophants and entertainers, hastening the empire's decline. Fast forward to modern Brazil, where the Centrone political system thrives on appointing loyal but unqualified allies, cementing mediocrity through connections rather than merit. Zimbabwe, under Robert Mugabe's later years, saw capable officials replaced by partisan loyalists, leading to economic collapse. This pattern, known as homophily, shows how leaders create echo chambers of incompetence, insulated from dissent or critique. Have you ever worked somewhere where questions were stifled, or raising concerns branded you as not a team player? These are telltale signs of this toxic network effect. Incompetent leaders don't just tolerate mediocrity, they cultivate it, building islands of loyalty that drown out innovation and truth. Yet, despite recognizing this, we're often drawn to leaders offering simplistic solutions. Why? Our brains crave certainty, and bold, confident voices, no matter how hollow, exploit this vulnerability. This isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a warning for today. From corporate boardrooms to political arenas, the cascade of incompetence thrives where accountability falters. But there's hope. By demanding transparency, fostering diverse perspectives, and valuing merit over loyalty, we can disrupt this cycle. Machiavelli didn't just expose power's flaws, he showed us how to see through them. The question is, will we keep falling for empty confidence, or will we build systems that reward true competence? Look around your own world. Where do you see this dynamic at play, and how can you challenge it? Cognitive closure. Why do we often choose leaders who offer simple answers to complex problems? The answer lies in cognitive psychology and our fundamental need for certainty in an uncertain world. Genuine expertise is almost always accompanied by nuance. Real experts understand the limitations of their knowledge. They recognize complexity. They acknowledge trade-offs. But these intellectual virtues can be profoundly unsatisfying to our psychological needs. For the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances as though they were realities, and are often more influenced by the things that seem than by those that are. When Machiavelli wrote these words, he identified something fundamental about human psychology. We crave certainty, even when certainty isn't possible or realistic. Consider what happens in times of crisis or uncertainty. People rarely rally behind the leader who says, "This is a complex situation with no easy answers that will require careful thought and inevitable trade-offs." Instead, they follow the person confidently proclaiming, "I alone can fix this." The solution is simple. Look at how actual environmental scientists speak about climate change, with careful caveats, ranges of possibilities, and nuanced policy recommendations versus how popular figures on both sides frame the issue with absolute certainty. The scientific approach, while intellectually honest, struggles to compete with the psychological comfort of simple narratives. Or consider healthcare debates. Actual medical experts acknowledge complex trade-offs in any system, while political figures offer simplistic solutions that promise everything with no downsides. Which approach typically wins public support? The simple, certain one, regardless of feasibility. In a particularly jarring 2017 experiment, Yale researchers discovered something disturbing about how we process political information. When subjects were presented with mathematically complex policy problems and solutions, their ability to correctly interpret the data was directly affected by whether the results aligned with their political beliefs. Even more striking, the most mathematically skilled participants showed the strongest bias, using their intelligence not to reach the correct answer, but to justify their preferred conclusion. Cognitive psychologists call this cognitive closure, our desire for definite answers rather than continued ambiguity. Studies show that when people feel threatened or uncertain, their need for cognitive closure increases dramatically. They become more receptive to black and white thinking and more willing to follow authoritarian leaders who project absolute certainty. This creates a dangerous dynamic. The more complex and frightening our world becomes, the more susceptible we become to simplistic thinking and the leaders who peddle it. It's like a psychological immune system failure. Precisely when we most need nuanced thinking, we become most vulnerable to intellectual shortcuts. Ask yourself, have you ever found yourself drawn to an explanation precisely because it was simple and definitive, even when part of you suspected the reality was more complex? That's this principle at work in your own mind. While our psychological comfort with simplicity explains part of this dynamic, there's an even more troubling dimension to consider. One that reveals why intelligence alone doesn't guarantee effective resistance to manipulative power. Moral considerations. Here's where Machiavelli becomes truly unsettling. He suggested that moral considerations often handicap intelligent people in power struggles. In what might be his most infamous passage, he wrote, "It is necessary for a prince who wishes to maintain his position to learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge or not to use it according to necessity." While intelligent people typically develop more complex moral reasoning, this can actually impede their ability to compete for power against those unburdened by such considerations. In any competitive environment, the person willing to cross ethical lines has access to strategies that morally constrained competitors do not. They can make promises they have no intention of keeping. They can undermine rivals through deception. They can exploit fears and prejudices that others refuse to touch. Consider the contrasting fates of Cicero versus Julius Caesar in ancient Rome. Cicero, brilliant and principled, ultimately lost the power struggle to Caesar, who had no qualms about crossing the Rubicon, literally and figuratively, breaking norms his opponents felt bound to respect. In modern contexts, we see ethical candidates struggling against opponents willing to employ deception and character assassination. In organizational contexts, University of British Columbia researchers found that psychopathic traits like lack of empathy were positively associated with rapid advancement when combined with social charm. This pattern appears cross-culturally, from China's Shen Yu, ruthless businesswoman archetype, to Nordic companies, where studies show that, despite cultural emphasis on collaboration, manipulative leaders often outpace their more ethical peers in advancement speed. This creates what game theorists call a race to the bottom. When unethical tactics prove successful, others face pressure to adopt similar approaches or be left behind. Over time, this can transform entire systems, making unethical behavior the norm rather than the exception. Understanding these dark dynamics might make the situation seem hopeless. But not all environments equally reward incompetence and unethical behavior. By recognizing which conditions favor stupidity and power, we can begin to design systems that select for genuine merit instead. Different environments. Machiavelli understood that different environments reward different qualities. Some contexts naturally select for competence, while others create fertile ground for incompetence to flourish. What determines which type of environment develops? Several structural factors. First, feedback loops and accountability structures. In environments with clear, immediate feedback about decisions, incompetence is quickly exposed. Think of a surgeon whose patients consistently die, or a bridge engineer whose structures collapse. These fields tend to select for genuine competence because failure is obvious and consequential. But in environments where feedback is delayed, indirect, or easily manipulated, incompetence can thrive indefinitely. Political systems where outcomes can be blamed on predecessors or external factors. Corporate hierarchies where results can be obscured through creative accounting. Or media landscapes where being entertaining matters more than being accurate. These are all fertile grounds for the incompetent to rise. Second, institutional design and power distribution. Centralized power systems with weak checks and balances create conditions where incompetence flourishes. The Soviet Union's collapse was accelerated by a system that concentrated decision-making in unaccountable hands. Conversely, Germany's dual-board corporate governance structure, which separates management from oversight, provides structural resistance to incompetent leadership. Third, information asymmetry and complexity. When success is easily measured and compared, merit tends to win. But when goals are ambiguous or success is subjectively evaluated, style often trumps substance. Men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, because it belongs to everybody to see you, to few to come in touch with you. What Machiavelli recognized here is that most people evaluate others based on surface impressions rather than deep understanding, especially in complex domains where few have the expertise to make informed judgments. Fourth, economic incentive. Structures. Systems that reward short-term performance over long-term outcomes create fertile ground for incompetent leadership with superficial charm. The 2008 financial crisis exemplified how incentive structures rewarding immediate profits, regardless of risk, fostered leadership that prioritized appearance over substance. Ask yourself, in your own life, which environmental factors promote competence and which enable incompetence to thrive? Understanding these structural forces can help you navigate your own path and recognize when systems are vulnerable to manipulation. Even in well-designed systems, incompetent leaders can still rise by employing specific psychological tactics that allow them to manipulate perception and neutralize opposition. Psychological tactics. Incompetent leaders don't maintain power by accident. They deploy specific psychological tactics to solidify their position. Tactics Machiavelli would have recognized immediately. First, they exploit tribalism and identity politics by creating clear in-groups and out-groups. They transform substantive criticism into perceived attacks from enemies. This shields them from accountability while strengthening their supporters' emotional investment. Psychologists call this identity fusion. When a leader successfully links their personal identity to their followers' group identity, challenging the leader feels like an attack on the group itself, and by extension, on followers' own identities. Consider how cult leaders like Jim Jones, or authoritarian figures throughout history, cultivated us versus them mentalities. In Malaysia, former Prime Minister Najib Razak exploited ethnic divisions to maintain power despite corruption scandals. Brazil's polarization under Bolsonaro demonstrated how tribal identity can override factual reality. Second, they leverage cognitive load and information overwhelm by constantly generating chaos, crises, and controversies. Incompetent leaders overwhelm our cognitive resources. When we're busy processing an endless stream of outrages, we have little mental energy left for critical analysis or organized resistance. Third, they employ what George Orwell called doublethink, the ability to hold contradictory beliefs simultaneously. By constantly shifting positions and rewriting history, they create an environment where truth feels subjective and accountability becomes impossible. The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances, and the world consists chiefly of the vulgar. When Machiavelli wrote these words, he wasn't displaying contempt for ordinary people. He was acknowledging a psychological vulnerability we all share. Our cognitive architecture evolved for a simpler world, making us susceptible to manipulation in complex information environments. Fourth, they exploit economic precarity and systemic vulnerabilities. When people are struggling economically or feel insecure about their future, they become more susceptible to leaders who promise simple solutions to complex structural problems. In post-industrial regions worldwide, economic anxiety creates fertile ground for incompetent leadership that offers easy scapegoats rather than honest analysis. Consider your own media consumption. How often do you find yourself chasing the latest outrage rather than focusing on deeper, more consequential issues? That's this principle at work. Recognizing these dark patterns is essential, but not enough. We need concrete strategies to protect ourselves and our communities from their influence. Awareness in a world awash with confident voices peddling simplistic answers. How do we shield ourselves from manipulation and incompetence? Niccolo Machiavelli, the keen-eyed realist of power, would urge us to arm ourselves with awareness and wisdom. At the individual level, our first line of defense is understanding the hidden forces shaping our thoughts. By recognizing these, we become less vulnerable to deception. This defense hinges on three powerful practices that can transform how we navigate our chaotic world. First, we must cultivate intellectual humility, the courage to admit the limits of our knowledge. Research shows that those with intellectual humility excel at evaluating ideas based on evidence, not bluster. It's like a cognitive immune system, shielding us from the virus of false certainty. When we embrace the possibility that we might be wrong, we open ourselves to learning and resist the seductive pull of overconfident leaders. This humility doesn't weaken us. It empowers us to seek truth over ego. Second, We need razor-sharp media literacy, the ability to sift depth from spectacle. In an age of information overload, we must deliberately choose sources that prioritize substance over flash. Question the framing of every headline, scrutinize the motives behind bold claims, and filter out noise to focus on clarity. As Warren Buffett wisely noted, really successful people say no to almost everything. Apply that to information. Reject the cacophony of clickbait and seek insight that stands the test of scrutiny. This discipline turns us from passive consumers into discerning thinkers. Third, embrace philosophical reflection, stepping back from the daily storm to ponder deeper principles. The ancient Stoics practiced daily reflection to tame emotional reactivity, and their wisdom holds today. Francis Bacon's words ring true. The wise man will make more opportunities than he finds. By carving out time to question our assumptions and consider alternative perspectives, we become active architects of our mental landscape, not mere pawns in someone else's narrative. At the collective level, the battle against incompetence demands robust institutional design. Systems can be built to curb bias, deception, and mediocrity through three key pillars. First, we need ironclad accountability mechanisms, structures that deliver unflinching feedback, no matter how charismatic a leader may be. Compare a company with an independent board that challenges executives to one where decisions are rubber-stamped. The Boeing 737 MAX crisis is a stark reminder. When engineers' warnings were ignored for profit, disaster followed. Accountability isn't optional, it's a lifeline. Second, institutions must champion cognitive diversity. Diverse teams aren't just a nod to fairness, they're empirically smarter. By blending varied perspectives, they dismantle assumptions and expose blind spots that uniform groups overlook. A 2015 McKinsey study found that companies with diverse leadership were 15% more likely to outperform their peers. Diversity isn't a buzzword, it's a bulwark against error. Third, transparency must be non-negotiable. Rules like government sunshine laws or medical conflict of interest disclosures strip away the veil of jargon and secrecy that incompetence hides behind. When actions are laid bare, manipulation loses its power. Education weaves these principles together. It's not enough to teach skills. We must instill critical thinking and ethical reasoning. Athens gave us the academy, Florence the humanists. Great. Civilizations don't just educate, they cultivate wisdom. So pause and reflect. Which of these protections thrive in your community and which are missing? Imagine a world where systems prioritize competence, humility, and truth. What could we achieve? Machiavelli, often misunderstood, didn't glorify deception. He exposed it. He'd likely see our modern predicament, rife with overconfident leaders and polarized echo chambers, as a call to action. His lesson endures. Power isn't inherently noble. It's earned through worthy use. By embracing intellectual humility, sharpening our media literacy, and demanding transparent, diverse systems, we can transcend the traps Machiavelli warned of. Ask yourself, where do you see these dynamics in your world? How can you challenge them? The path to a wiser society starts with us, armed with clarity, courage, and a relentless pursuit of truth. Machiavelli has been misunderstood for centuries. He wasn't advocating for the dark patterns he described. He was exposing them. By understanding how power actually works, rather than how we wish it worked, he believed we could create better systems of governance. It is not titles that honor men, but men that honor titles. This profound observation reminds us that authority itself deserves no inherent respect. Power must be earned through worthy use, regardless of who holds it. The intersection of Machiavellian political philosophy and modern psychology reveals uncomfortable truths about human nature and social systems. But uncomfortable truths are precisely what we need if we hope to create better futures. The path forward isn't pretending these dynamics don't exist. It's understanding them deeply enough to transcend them. It's designing systems that account for human vulnerabilities rather than exploiting them. It's developing personal practices that strengthen our resistance to manipulation. Most importantly, it's recognizing that while stupidity may sometimes gain power, intelligence, coupled with moral courage, remains our best hope for creating societies where merit truly matters. What dynamics have you noticed in your own communities? Have you seen instances where these patterns played out? Feel free to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Thank you for watching. If this video opened your mind or helped you see reality in a new light, don't forget to like and subscribe to Top Hidden Knowledge so you never miss our next deep dive into mystery, perception, and the hidden workings of our universe. And, if you have time, explore more videos on our channel. We're just getting started. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop questioning the world around you.